March 17, 1943, Berlin. That day would mark a pivotal moment in the grim calculus of the Second World War. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of German military intelligence, sat rigid before his mahogany desk as a heavy folder slammed down with such force it sent his fragile porcelain coffee cup trembling, spilling dark liquid over a stack of sensitive intelligence reports. Those documents could mean death if discovered by the Gestapo. Yet, what lay inside the folder was far more dangerous than mere ink on paper. It threatened the very foundation of Nazi Germany's hopes for victory. Canaris's gaze flickered to the tall windows of Abwehr headquarters, where sunlight glimmered weakly on the Landwehr Canal, a chilling reminder of darker days. Decades earlier, the body of Rosa Luxemburg, a revolutionary who had defied oppressive regimes, was found floating there. Now, Canaris faced a different kind of revolution, an industrial juggernaut brewing thousands of miles away in the heartland of America. The report in his hands was staggering. Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant was churning out a B-24 Liberator bomber once every hour. This single factory, a mile-long assembly line of steel and sweat, was producing aircraft at a rate surpassing Germany's entire military vehicle output. The B-24 itself was a masterpiece of complexity. 1.5 million parts, 450,000 rivets, countless components meticulously assembled into a machine weighing 18 tons, roaring with four 1,200 horsepower engines. Major Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, his most trusted aide, stood at attention and confirmed the data beyond doubt. Ratios were checked and triple-checked, intercepted communications verified, agent reports from Mexico City studied meticulously. America's production capacity could no longer be regarded as mere boastful propaganda, as Nazi ideology had insisted. It was an ironclad reality, one this day shook Canaris to his core. Yet the same report that stirred alarm among the few honest men in German intelligence would trigger a catastrophic failure of comprehension throughout the Nazi leadership. For years, German intelligence had accurately collected information showing America's soaring industrial might. But ideology, racial prejudice, and fear had blinded commanders like Hermann Göring and Adolf Hitler to truth. They refused to believe the math, dismissing corroborated facts as enemy tricks or exaggerations. Just 2 years before, Luftwaffe General Karl Kohler had presented Göring with intelligence provided by Germany's military attaché in Washington, Friedrich von Bodecker. The man had reported that American aircraft production was nearing 2,000 planes per month. Göring laughed openly. "America," he declared, "can only build refrigerators and razor blades, not warplanes. Their mongrel society and democracy make them weak and inefficient." Hitler echoed these sentiments, dismissing the idea that a democratic nation, a nation of Jews, Negroes, and other inferior races, could possibly achieve such industrial feats in mere months. But as 1943 progressed, the unmistakable truth surfaced relentlessly from multiple independent sources. Mexican industrialists sympathetic to the Reich, Spanish diplomats in key embassies, Swedish engineers visiting Detroit, intercepted letters from American workers, and covert agents embedded in the Americas all told a consistent story. The Willow Run plant alone was outproducing the entirety of Germany's aircraft factories. The magnitude of production, the scale of workforce diversity, including thousands of women and African American workers, defied the very racial and ideological doctrines upheld by the Nazi regime. The burden of conveying this disturbing truth fell on men like Oberstleutnant Nicholas Ritter, head of the Air Intelligence Section of the Abwehr. Unlike many, Ritter understood American industrial capacity. In the 1920s, he had lived in New York City, admired the rapid construction of the Chrysler Building, and appreciated the American ethos of innovation and relentless progress. His warnings were grave. If these numbers are correct, and I believe they are, then Germany has already lost this war. It is only a question of time. Meanwhile, German espionage networks gleaned more details from unlikely sources. American businessmen trading in Mexico City, such as oil executive Harold Morrison, who unwittingly described the sprawling assembly line at a reception, unaware that German agent Wolfgang Blau was documenting every detail. Morrison marveled at the plant's mile-long assembly line, the thousands of workers, including women and black women, creating the most complex machine ever designed. The factory's method, breaking the bomber into thousands of sub-assemblies expertly handled by workers trained in days, was a revelation shaking the foundations of conventional wartime production belief. Reports from neutral nations reinforced this intelligence. Colonel José Ungria, Spanish military attaché in Washington, met Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, and heard with amazement the explanation of modular moving assembly lines building planes like automobiles. Sorensen spoke openly of intense worker training programs and the diversity of the workforce, which included women, minority groups, and youths, all contributing to an unmatched collaborative effort. Yet, despite this deluge of evidence, Hitler and his inner circle repeatedly refused to accept reality. They clung to denials that such mass production was possible, labeling the reports as enemy misinformation or propaganda. The inability to reconcile facts with ideology led to one of modern warfare's most costly intelligence failures. Even when Canaris presented film footage secretly smuggled through Switzerland, showing the mile-long Willow Run assembly in full operation, the Führer's court dismissed it as fake. The tragic irony was that the German intelligence service had abundant, accurate data, but lacked the will and wisdom to act upon it. This denial contributed directly to strategic miscalculations that squandered German resources, while America's mechanical arms multiplied relentlessly. In a cruel twist of fate, the very spies who sought to save the Reich by revealing this overwhelming American industrial power became victims of the regime's paranoia and rigidity. Many, including Canaris himself, met grim ends. This first shock, felt on that March day in 1943 as the folder slammed down in Berlin, was a herald of the total collapse impending for Germany, wrought by the unstoppable tide of American industry. It marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich, a fate sealed not by weapons alone, but by factories, workers, and the cold logic of mathematical inevitability. March 1941. The corridors of power in Berlin echoed with confident dismissals, yet the quiet pulse of history was shifting across the Atlantic. For Wilhelm Canaris and a select few in the Abwehr, the warnings from America's growing industrial war machine were becoming undeniable, even if the Nazi leadership refused to acknowledge them. 2 years earlier, the seeds of disbelief had been sown during a briefing by General Friedrich von Baedeker, the German military attaché in Washington, who delivered a stark message. American aircraft production was rapidly increasing, approaching 2,000 planes per month. Hermann Göring, commandeering the Luftwaffe with his characteristic arrogance, scorned the idea. "The Americans build refrigerators and razor blades," he sneered to Hitler and his generals. "Not warplanes. Their democracy makes them weak. Their mongrel population makes them inefficient." Hitler's own conviction echoed this cynicism, dismissing the burgeoning American war effort as naive. Yet behind this veneer of mockery lay a fragile truth. American industry was mobilizing at an unprecedented scale. Roosevelt's December 1941 declaration, soon after Pearl Harbor, to gear the nation for producing 50,000 planes annually, was met by skepticism among insiders and outsiders alike. The notion seemed impossible to many. Hearing, after all, in 1939, production was just a few thousand planes a year. But Roosevelt's vision ignited transformation, and men like William Knudsen, the Danish-born automaker turned war production chief, began orchestrating an industrial symphony. Meanwhile, Canaris's Abwehr agents honed their networks across Mexico, Sweden, and South America, gathering fragments that converged into an inescapable reality. From Mexican industrialists sympathetic to Germany, to Spanish diplomats reporting on Ford's gargantuan Willow Run complex, the whispers became a chorus. America's assembly lines were turning out bombers faster than any believed possible. Swedish engineers who toured the plant marveled at its scale, while intercepted messages from American executives detailed sprawling assembly lines and a workforce invigorated by patriotic duty. Yet a lethal barrier blocked these truths from reaching Hitler's inner circle with the clarity and urgency required. Nazi racial ideology, obsessed with notions of Aryan superiority, blinded leaders to the very real contributions of women, African Americans, immigrants, and disenfranchised groups fueling the American production miracle. Reports that women, often the cornerstone of this workforce, performed precision tasks better than men, were dismissed or ignored. Canaris and his closest advisors struggled against this tide of denial. Obstinate to these realities, Göring refused to accept intelligence, steadfast in his belief that the Americans lacked the discipline and racial purity necessary for war production. The absurdity worsened as he mocked intelligence, showing monthly aluminum consumption at Willow Run exceeding Germany's entire output. Into this climate entered desperate measures. Operation Pastorius, a bold attempt to sabotage American factories from within. George John Dash, a native German-America turned saboteur, tasked with infiltrating and destroying war plants, quickly defected to the FBI, revealing the Oval Office's immense production capacity. Despite Dash's warnings and detailed first-hand accounts, Nazi leaders persisted in denial. In the grand halls of Karen Hall, Canaris presented his case one final time to Göring, lining up photographs, manifests, and testimonies that painted a stark picture of America's rapid ramp-up. Göring's refusal to believe was complete. "These are wooden mock-ups for propaganda," he claimed, rejecting evidence as propaganda lies. The consequences of rejecting truth were catastrophic. While Germany funneled resources into futile Wunderwaffen projects and slave labor programs, America's assembly lines evolved, incorporating frontline feedback and harnessing a diverse, voluntary workforce. The invisible battle of numbers and facts dictated the fate of empires. Legions of women riveting bombers, thousands of immigrant workers mastering complex assembly tasks, and managers orchestrating movements of metal and machinery with uncanny precision. In this crucible of denial and resilience, the scales tipped irrevocably. Germany could wage battles on eastern plains and Atlantic seas, but its refusal to acknowledge and counter America's industrial might sealed the Third Reich's fate. For Canaris and others who saw truth, the war was not lost on battlefields alone. It was lost in the halls of disbelief, where facts bowed to ideology. June 1942. The American industrial heartland beat with an urgency previously unimaginable. As the tide of war surged across continents and oceans, factories in Detroit, Chicago, and beyond transformed into colossal machines of production. Yet, this relentless industrial surge was eclipsed in the shadows by the increasing desperation of a Nazi regime drowning in its own disbelief. German intelligence networks stretched across the Americas began to paint an unambiguous picture. Their agents reported at tense briefings and in coded transmissions the astonishing scale and efficiency of America's aircraft factories. From Mexico City to Buenos Aires, whispers turned into confirmed reports. Ford's Willow Run was no mere factory. It was an industrial fortress, with assembly lines stretching for miles and a workforce numbering in the tens of thousands. Women riveted, machines whirred, and a bomber rolled off the line every hour. Among the German officers grappling with this information was Oberstleutnant Nicholas Ritter, a man uniquely equipped to understand its magnitude. Having spent a decade in New York during the roaring 1920s, Ritter had witnessed firsthand the American spirit of ingenuity and mass production. Now, he stood as a rare voice within the German military apparatus, insisting on the gravity of the reports before him. The intelligence gathered was diverse and irrefutable. Intercepted communications revealed logistical marvels: rail cars laden with aluminum, miles of conveyor belts feeding assembly points, and worker shifts operating relentlessly day and night. Diplomats and businessmen from neutral countries, enthralled by tours arranged under the guise of investment discussions, came back recounting tales of a factory where clouds could form beneath the high beams, and thousands of hands shaped the instruments of war with precision. Yet, the Nazi leadership would not listen. Hermann Göring, weighed by arrogance and prejudice, rejected these reports as fabrications or exaggerations. He clung to an ideology that conflated racial superiority with industrial capability, refusing to fathom the contributions of women, minorities, and democratic cooperation. They cannot produce what they claim, he dismissed, convinced that democracy was inherently weak. In this climate of denial, Canaris and his closest allies faced increasing peril. Their attempts to persuade Hitler's inner sanctum were met with skepticism at best, hostility at worst. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels and other hardliners reinforced narratives minimizing American strength, framing the reports as enemy deception designed to sap German morale. Simultaneously, Operation Pastorius unfolded, a desperate Nazi ploy to infiltrate American soil and sabotage critical factories. George John Dash, leading a team of saboteurs, became disillusioned by the very might he sought to destroy. Captured after landing on Long Island, Dash's confessions to the FBI revealed not only the locations of American war plants, but also painted a portrait of an industrial machine so vast and efficient it defied sabotage. Despite this, Stalin's Soviet Red Army pressed westward. The Allies prepared for major offensives, and the skies darkened with the roar of American bombers produced at rates Germany could scarcely imagine. Yet, at home in Berlin, ideological blindness blinded strategic clarity, sealing the Third Reich's doom. The raw data continued to flow. Spanish military attaché Colonel José Ungría, engaging openly with American industrial leaders, documented the modular assembly methods revolutionizing production. Swedish engineers marveled at the capital investments and specialized tooling unmatched by European standards. Even Japanese intelligence, covertly acknowledging the disparity, confirmed the factory's output exceeded their entire aircraft industry. Nazi economists and strategists struggled in vain to reconcile these figures with their worldview. The staggering fact was simple. America's industrial output, fueled by the ingenuity of millions of free men and women, was overwhelming Germany's war machine not in the battlefield alone, but in the factory floor. The tragedy was not in the failure of German intelligence to gather evidence. It was in Berlin's refusal to acknowledge it. Critical decisions based on denial rather than data led to catastrophic resource misallocations and strategic blunders. As American bombers darkened the skies over Europe, the heavy price of ideological obstinacy became painfully clear. September 1942. The relentless march of the American war production machine could no longer be ignored, even within the fortified walls of Nazi Germany's intelligence community. As reports from independent sources converged with increasing precision, the scale of the industrial effort at Willow Run began to crystallize into an undeniable reality. If only the Nazi leadership could summon the courage to believe it. Amid persistent disbelief, Operation Pastorius was authorized, one of the Reich's final gambits to halt the tide by sending saboteurs to American soil. George John Dasch, a German-American with intimate knowledge of the United States, led one of two teams tasked with infiltrating factories vital to the American war effort. Landing covertly on Long Island by submarine in June 1942, their mission was to cripple production lines and undermine morale. Yet Dasch's experience told a different story. Astonished by the efficiency and scale of American industry, the mile-long assembly lines producing B-24 Liberator bombers, and the diverse, dedicated workforce, he found himself disillusioned. Witnessing women, minorities, and young apprentices skillfully executing highly specialized tasks under tight schedules, Dasch recognized the power propelling the arsenal of democracy. His swift surrender to the FBI was a blow to Nazi intelligence, but an unexpected boon to American officials. Through extensive interrogation, Dasch revealed details of German espionage efforts and expressed disbelief at Berlin's refusal to accept the overwhelming evidence of American production capacity. The profound disconnect between solid intelligence and Nazi leadership's ideological denial became apparent. Canaris himself lamented that Berlin regarded these truths as propaganda. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the Atlantic, Canaris prepared the most comprehensive briefing of his career. At Karin Hall, Göring's decadent hunting lodge outside Berlin, Canaris laid out evidence from 17 independent sources: photographs of sprawling assembly lines, intercepted supply manifests, testimonies from diplomats and businessmen, and meticulous intelligence reports. Recognizing its explosive potential, Canaris burned the film after viewing it in a secure room, knowing if it reached Nazi leadership, accusations of treason or fabrication would follow. To reveal the footage might have saved Germany years earlier, yet the risk to those who spoke truth was far too great. As 1942 passed into 1943, aerial reconnaissance photographs further corroborated the reports. Spanish intelligence agents provided detailed overhead images showing thousands of workers' cars in parking lots, completed bombers lined on adjacent airfields, and the sprawling factory infrastructure. Photo analysts concluded that production rates matched or exceeded all human intelligence estimates. Still, the Nazi leadership clung to fantasies. Göring dismissed the cumulative evidence as clever photographic tricks or staged illusions. When confronted with data showing monthly aluminum consumption at Willow Run dwarfing Germany's entire production, ridicule met Canaris's warnings. Nazi racial ideology convicted that women and minority workers could not outperform Aryan factories. This tragic refusal to accept reality became a fatal thread in the fabric of Germany's downfall, a cognitive dissonance that extinguished reason in favor of ideology. Canaris and loyal officers who dared challenge falsehoods were marginalized or executed. The intelligence war was decided not by lack of information, but by the leadership's willful blindness. September 1943. The stark reality of American industrial supremacy continued to weigh heavier on the German war effort. Yet Nazi leadership remained trapped within a web of denial and ideological rigidity. The evidence was overwhelming. Mighty factories like Ford's Willow Run produced bombers faster than German factories could even assemble and deploy military vehicles. Yet, the racial dogma and disbelief at the top prevented the flow of actionable intelligence from shaping effective strategy. At Willow Run, the plant was operating near full capacity. Over 40,000 workers, including women, African Americans, disabled veterans, and teenagers, toiled in a meticulously coordinated system. A B-24 Liberator rolled off the line every hour, made possible through modular assembly, hydraulic riveting, and rigorous quality control. Each worker specialized in a tiny slice of the gigantic whole, transforming raw aluminum into aircraft that would dominate the skies above Europe and the Pacific. Despite these monumental facts, Hermann Göring and Adolf Hitler clung to dismissive fantasies. Göring ridiculed the notion that women and minorities could contribute meaningfully to war production. Hitler insisted that no matter the numbers, America couldn't possibly achieve sustained production of such complex machinery, branding the reports as deception meant to slow Germany's war machine. Within intelligence circles, officers like Wilhelm Canaris were increasingly endangered. Their persistent efforts to present the truth were met with accusations of defeatism and treason. Canaris himself would be removed from his post, later executed, victims of a regime unwilling to face inconvenient facts. German attempts to disrupt American production had failed miserably. Operation Pastorius, the sabotage mission launched in 1942, collapsed after George John Dash defected to the FBI, revealing the extent of Nazi espionage. Dash's candid accounts of the American war plants, vast, efficient, staffed by a diverse and determined workforce, confirmed for U.S. intelligence that their industrial efforts were well protected and formidable. Meanwhile, Albert Speer, the Reich's armaments minister, privately recognized the catastrophe taking shape. His diaries hint at the despair and isolation felt by those who understood what the leadership refused to admit aloud. Production statistics showed the United States was producing aircraft in volumes Germany could not match, while resource shortages and Allied bombing crippled German industry. Despite internal warnings, the Nazi regime pursued costly Wunderwaffen projects, miracle weapons and secret technologies, diverting precious resources from practical production needs. Slave labor factories were established underground, but sabotage, poor working conditions, and logistical nightmares rendered these efforts ineffective. The Allied strategic bombing campaign escalated dramatically. Massive air raids targeted German manufacturing centers, unparalleled in scale and intensity. The 8th Air Force and other Allied formations launched thousands of sorties, carrying payloads that devastated factories, rail yards, and fuel depots. German air defenses faltered under the sheer weight of American numbers and technological superiority, including escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang, themselves products of America's booming war economy. Amid this maelstrom stood the average factory worker, often overlooked in grand histories, yet central to the outcome. Rosie the Riveter, and tens of thousands of women like her, became icons of America's industrial revolution, carrying rivet guns, assembling components, and inspecting finished aircraft with unrelenting dedication and skill. The demographic transformation of the workforce shattered Nazi racial myths and underscored the power of voluntary unity. By the close of 1943, America's aircraft production numbers far outpaced Germany's. Reports detailed how a single factory's production dwarfed entire German aircraft factories combined. German intelligence officers knew the truth, but feared reporting facts counter to Nazi ideology. March 1944. The relentless industrial tide forged by American workers, engineers, and managers surged with unstoppable force. Factories like Willow Run operated at unprecedented speeds, producing B-24 Liberator bombers with breathtaking efficiency. One rolling off every 63 minutes, staffed by over 40,000 workers representing the broad mosaic of American society. Women, African Americans, disabled veterans, and teenagers labored side by side, breaking barriers and shattering Nazi racial dogma with every rivet driven. Yet, in Berlin, steadfast denial persisted. The Nazi leadership remained captive to ideology, dismissing overwhelming evidence even as the reality grew blatantly undeniable. Despite comprehensive intelligence from multiple independent sources, including photographs, intercepted communications, agent reports, and first-hand testimonies, Hitler, Goering, and key generals clung to fantasies of American inferiority. Wilhelm Canaris and his loyal confidants tirelessly attempted to break through this wall of delusion. Canaris brought concrete evidence to the Reich Marshal's estate, photographs of the sprawling assembly line, manifest documents revealing aluminum consumption eclipsing Germany's entire industry, and film footage, smuggled clandestinely, showing the mile-long conveyor in full motion. Each piece underscored the terrifying truth. America's industrial output was no rumor or exaggeration, but a mathematical certainty sealing the Third Reich's fate. Despite this, Goering's contempt and scorn only deepened. He derided the notion that inferior races and women could muster the production capacity to outmatch the Aryan war machine. Wooden mock-ups, he sneered, calling Canaris a fool. This ideological blindness became the greatest miscarriage of war judgment, as Nazi leaders chose fantasy over fact. Elsewhere, Operation Pastorius, the 1942 sabotage mission aimed at American factories, had failed spectacularly, largely due to the defection of saboteur George John Dash, who exposed Nazi plans and confirmed the formidable American industrial strength. Such failures underscored the desperation coursing through Nazi intelligence. On the home front, Albert Speer, the one Nazi leader with acute industrial acumen, privately recognized the grotesque disparity. His diaries reveal a man trapped between brutal truth and political survival, privately alarmed by American production statistics, but publicly silenced. Meanwhile, Allied strategic bombing intensified. The 8th Air Force unleashed waves of bombers and fighters overwhelming German air defenses, crippling aircraft factories, oil refineries, and transport networks. The feedback loop between frontline combat experience and rapid production improvements ensured Allied aircraft constantly evolved, maintaining technological superiority. In stark contrast, Germany's industrial output degraded. Reliant on slave labor and underground factories, production was inefficient and plagued by sabotage. Critical shortages of material and experienced personnel further limited combat readiness. By mid-1944, the mathematical reality was irrepressible. The Allies ramped up bombing campaigns, crippling the Luftwaffe's ability to challenge Allied skies. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, over 11,000 Allied aircraft swarmed over Normandy, a tangible demonstration of industrial supremacy. The Luftwaffe could muster only a few hundred fighters, a devastating imbalance rooted in the industrial mobilization America had achieved while Nazi leaders clung to denial. As women and minorities in American factories fueled this output, Nazi racial dogma crumbled under the weight of reality. The very weaknesses Goering mocked now formed the backbone of America's might, proving that voluntary cooperation and unity could outproduce tyranny and oppression. The tragedy of Canaris and other truth-tellers was that their warnings, based on unassailable intelligence, fell on deaf ears. In refusing to acknowledge the power of American industry, Nazi leadership willingly accelerated their own destruction. October 1944. The cumulative weight of American industrial might was now an irreversible force shaping the global battlefield. The production lines churned steadily, transforming metal, labor, and ingenuity into thousands of new aircraft every month. Ford's Willow Run plant stood as a beacon of this transformation, having perfected the delivery of a B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, day and night. The factory's workforce, a vibrant mosaic of women, minorities, youth, and veterans, embodied the democratic spirit that Nazi racial ideology dismissed but could not overcome. The Nazi war machine continued to reel from these overwhelming odds. Despite the influx of wonder weapons and secret jet projects, such as the Me-262, Germany's inability to sustain large-scale production crippled their ability to reinforce increasingly battered lines. Their industries were ravaged by relentless Allied bombing raids, logistical breakdowns, and internal sabotage. The technological advances could not compensate for the tidal wave of American volume and efficiency. Hermann Göring, once proud and boastful, now faced a grim reckoning. Reports from frontline pilots and intelligence units chronicled the terrifying dominance of American air forces. Huge bomber formations overloaded German air defenses, while numbers backed by unrivaled production elapsed all hopes of regaining air superiority. Göring's earlier contempt for American mongrel society was joined by desperation and an undeniable sense of defeat. In Berlin, the refusal to accept reality persisted as a dangerous addiction. Adolf Hitler remained convinced that German mastery lay in racial and technological superiority rather than industrial output. He dismissed warnings from Armaments Minister Albert Speer, who documented with mounting alarm America's production leap and its consequences. Speer's diaries reveal a man trapped between the truth of overwhelming American advantage and the impossible political consequences of admitting it. Meanwhile, the workforces pumping out war materiel in the United States and allied nations had evolved beyond mere labor. They became the beating heart of a vast industrial symphony, their efforts meticulously coordinated among manufacturers, logistics units, and scientific innovators. Quality control methods refined in bomber production translated into tools for efficiency that would famously power post-war economic growth and America's technological ascendancy. The strategic bombing campaign peaked in intensity. The Omaha and Utah beaches on D-Day were secured with overwhelming air cover that neutralized German attempts at counterattack. By late 1944, the 8th Air Force was losing hundreds of bombers monthly, but replacing them at a rate unheard of in military history, while the Luftwaffe faltered desperately on crushed wings. Among the rank and file of the workforce, individuals like Rose Will Monroe, the real Rosie the Riveter, inspired the world with unyielding dedication. These women, many of whom had joined the defense industry only months before, mastered complex skills such as riveting, wiring, and inspection, ensuring that the planes that bore their sweat dominated skies from the Pacific jungles to European cities. The paradox of Nazi denial faced the truth daily. The very diversity and democracy Göring scorned produced unmatched production capacity. Their inferior women, minorities, and youth maintained assembly lines that outpaced entire Axis nations' combined outputs. Canaris's warnings, once whispered in secret corridors, echoed devastatingly through the ruined halls of Berlin. By fall of 1944, it was clear. No algorithm of ideological fantasy could outmatch the raw power of America's production miracle. The United States had, through innovation, unity, and sheer will, reshaped the war's destiny, proving that factories and workers, not just weapons and soldiers, decide the fate of nations. January 1945. The war had reached a crescendo of destruction and despair for Nazi Germany. The vast factories and assembly lines of the United States continued to thunder on, producing aircraft, engines, and weaponry at a pace that seemed to defy logic and expectation. Ford's Willow run was at its zenith, churning out bombers with precision and speed, staffed by a workforce that defied every stereotype the Nazis had clung to. Women, African Americans, immigrants, and disabled veterans all played a vital role, united by purpose and resolve. Yet Germany's desperation only grew. The Nazi leadership, mired in denial and ideological blindness, persisted in their futile hopes for miracle weapons, the jet-powered Me-262 and other experimental aircraft that came too late, too few, and too flawed to alter the war's trajectory. Allied strategic bombing had crippled German industrial centers, disrupted transport networks, and depleted resources critical to sustaining war production. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former might, often forced to confront overwhelming numbers with fewer and poorer quality fighters. In Berlin, intelligence officers who had long warned of America's industrial might now faced marginalization, or worse. Wilhelm Canaris had already been executed for opposing Hitler's regime, a victim of the ruthless suppression of inconvenient truths. Others who dared to challenge the official narrative were silenced by fear or death, leaving Nazi Germany blind to the very forces destroying it. The Allies pressed their advantage relentlessly. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 demonstrated the scale of their aerial superiority, with thousands of bombers and fighters overwhelming German defenses and enabling the liberation of Western Europe. This dominance was no fluke. It was born in the sweat and steel of American factories thousands of miles away. The social transformation underpinning this production miracle was profound. The image of Rosie the Riveter was more than propaganda. It symbolized the millions of American women who entered factories, mastering complex skills and contributing flawlessly to wartime manufacturing. This newfound equality and cooperation among diverse groups constituted a sharp rebuke to Nazi racial theories and showcased the democratic advantage in wartime mobilization. As winter gave way to spring, Germany's capacity to respond waned. Fuel shortages, pilot attrition, and shattered infrastructure compounded the crisis. Meanwhile, American production never faltered. New models appeared rapidly, incorporating battlefield feedback, technological improvements, and manufacturing efficiencies that kept Allied air power dominant. The tragedy lay not in German espionage failures. They had gathered accurate intelligence, but in the regime's catastrophic refusal to accept reality. The refusal to believe the mathematical certainty of Allied industrial supremacy hastened collapse, prolonging a war that could have ended sooner, sparing millions of lives. In the final months, the roar of American bombers filled the skies over a crumbling Reich, symbols of freedom forged in factories and fueled by democratic resolve. The devastation was immense, but so was the lesson imparted. The power of truth, innovation, and unity in shaping history. April 1945. The skies above a devastated Germany bore silent witness to the final collapse of a regime undone not only by military might, but also by its own willful blindness. The once mighty Luftwaffe, once revered as an air force to dominate Europe, was now but a fragmented shadow, overwhelmed by an Allied aerial armada powered by the relentless output of American factories thousands of miles away. Ford's Willow Run bomber plant had become legend, a symbol of industrial prowess and democratic cooperation. Between 1942 and 1945, it produced over 8,600 B-24 Liberator bombers, a staggering testament to what free people, united by purpose and innovation, could achieve. The plant's workforce, women operating riveting guns with skill, African-American workers running complex machinery, disabled veterans learning new trades, broke Nazi racial and societal stereotypes with every aircraft completed. Despite this, the Nazi leadership persisted in denial. Even as intelligence officers painstakingly presented incontrovertible evidence, racial ideology and desperation blinded the highest echelons. Hermann Göring's earlier laughter at America's claims became a haunting echo of hubris, underscoring the catastrophic consequences of his willful ignorance. Captured documents and post-war interrogations revealed the scale of German intelligence's paradoxical failure. While professional officers recognized the truth of American production long before 1943, fear of being branded defeatists led to self-censorship and suppression of vital information. Wilhelm Canaris, Hans Oster, and others who spoke truth to power paid with their lives. The strategic bombing campaigns, fueled by American industrial might, had devastated German cities, factories, and infrastructure. The Allies dropped more ordnance on German industrial targets in a few months than Germany had bombed Britain during the entire war. German factories relocated underground to slave labor camps, unable to maintain production, plagued by sabotage and inefficiency. This industrial domination was more than a series of numbers. It was a demonstration of democratic resilience, organization, and innovation. The continuous feedback loop from battlefield to factory allowed rapid design improvements, ensuring that America's air forces flew aircraft evolving daily to meet combat demands. The legacy of this unparalleled production effort extended beyond military victory. It laid the foundation for America's post-war economic boom, technological leadership, and reshaped societal roles, especially for women and minorities. The diversity and voluntary cooperation that powered the war effort stood in stark contrast to the forced labor and ideological rigidity that had doomed the Third Reich. As Allied troops marched into a defeated Berlin, they did so under skies ruled by planes born of factories like Willow Run. The production miracle had decided the fate of nations, proving that industrial capacity, driven by truth and unity, eclipses even the most formidable military forces. May 1945. As the echoes of war faded, the profound significance of the American production miracle emerged with unmistakable clarity. The defeat of Nazi Germany was not merely won on battlefields or through military strategy alone. It was ultimately secured by an industrial revolution forged in the factories of a democratic nation. Ford's Willow Run, a vast complex spanning millions of square feet and staffed by tens of thousands, stood as a towering testament to what free people, united in purpose, could achieve. Over the course of the war, it produced more than 8,600 B-24 Liberators, outproducing Germany's entire bomber fleet. The assembly lines, powered by diverse Americans breaking barriers of race, gender, and age, symbolized a revolution, not just in manufacturing, but in social unity. The tragedy of the Third Reich was in its refusal to accept this reality. German intelligence services had gathered ample evidence, but were overwhelmed by ideological blindness and fear of political reprisal. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris and other truth-tellers who sought to warn the regime were silenced or executed, victims of a toxic fusion of denial and doctrine. The Nazi leadership's obstinate rejection of facts accelerated its demise in a catastrophic miscalculation. The Allied strategic bombing campaign, fueled by this industrial might, had devastated German industry and infrastructure, crippling its ability to wage war. The continuous evolution of American aircraft, enabled by a seamless feedback loop between combat forces and production lines, kept the Allies technologically and numerically superior. Fighter escorts like the P-51 Mustang, bombers such as the B-24 and B-17, and transport planes ensured sustained pressure on German forces on all fronts. Beyond victory, the legacy of this production renaissance shaped the coming era. The industrial techniques refined during the war powered the post-war American economic boom, technological innovation, and advancements in aerospace. Socially, the war altered gender roles, opened opportunities for minorities, and laid groundwork for civil rights progress. The story of Willow Run's assembly lines, the women who riveted planes with unmatched precision, the immigrant workers who mastered complex trades, and the young and old united across backgrounds, remains a powerful testament to democracy's strength. These factories built more than aircraft. They built freedom and prosperity. In the final verdict of history, Hermann Göring's contempt for American production was a fatal misjudgment. He laughed at the idea of 50,000 planes annually, only to be overwhelmed by more than 100,000. This miscalculation encapsulates the broader failure of Nazi Germany. To recognize that in total war, it is not just soldiers, but factories, skills, and the cooperative spirit of a free people that determine destiny. The American production miracle, while a testament to technological prowess, is ultimately a story of human spirit, a story that continues to inspire, reminding us that true strength lies in unity, innovation, and the courage to confront reality.